He came to clean a forgotten mansion, but when his loyal German shepherd pawed at a mossy brick wall, he uncovered a secret buried for 70 years. Behind the crumbling bricks lay a rusted safe and a diary telling of greed, betrayal, and a family erased by lies. When the powerful tried to silence the truth, a weary veteran and his dog stood firm. Because justice may fade beneath dust, but it never dies. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support truly means the world to us. A thin veil of morning mist clung to the Georgia pines, softening the ruins that sprawled across the hill like a sleeping beast. The Aldridge Mansion, once a jewel of the Old South, stood crooked and hollow, its white columns streaked with rust and ivy. The air carried the smell of damp wood, moss, and something older, something forgotten. Ethan Cole parked his weathered pickup at the foot of the gravel drive. He was a man of 46, tall and broad-shouldered, his once sunburned skin now etched with years of service and solitude. His dark brown hair, streaked with silver, peeked from beneath a faded cap. There was a certain patience in his movements, the kind born from surviving both war and the quieter battles of civilian life. Behind him leapt his companion, Shadow, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a coat of black and white, like storm clouds over snow. Shadow's eyes, sharp amber and always watchful, scanned the grounds as if sensing danger where Ethan saw only decay. The job had come unexpectedly, a call from a stranger when Ethan's gas tank was nearly dry. "Clean the Aldridge property," the man had said, "and the pay will be cash." Desperation didn't leave room for questions. Ethan had been sleeping in the truck since losing his security job 2 months earlier, the last remnant of stability gone. Shadow had kept him alive through the worst nights when the silence pressed too close and memories of Afghanistan came clawing back. He walked through the iron gates, their hinges shrieking in protest. The driveway curved up toward the mansion, lined by oaks whose roots cracked through the old stone path. Each step echoed with ghosts, laughter that once filled the porch, music that might have floated through those broken windows. Ethan's boots crunched over fallen magnolia leaves as he approached the massive front doors. Shadow's ears twitched, tail low, sensing his master's hesitation. The key had been left under a chipped flower pot, just as the voice on the phone promised. Ethan hesitated before turning it. The sound of the lock giving way was almost too loud in the stillness. Inside, the mansion greeted him with the stale breath of abandonment. Dust hung in the air like memory. Sunlight filtered through torn drapes, illuminating cobwebs stretched like fragile lace across chandeliers. In the grand foyer, a staircase wound upward, its railing carved from dark walnut, worn smooth by time. From the shadows of the parlor emerged Thomas Green, the lawyer who had hired him. Green was in his early 60s, sharp in posture but worn in spirit, with thin gray hair slicked neatly to the side and a narrow face lined by sleeplessness. His suit was expensive but outdated, and his eyes were the color of cold tea, distant, unreadable. "Mr. Cole," he greeted, extending a thin hand. "You'll find cleaning supplies in the kitchen. Keep to your work. The trust doesn't pay for curiosity." Ethan nodded, uneasy. Green's tone carried the weight of a warning rather than advice. The man lingered just long enough to glance around, as though checking that certain things remained undisturbed, then left as quietly as he had appeared. The echo of the door closing felt final, like a gate locking behind him. Hours passed in silence. Ethan worked steadily, sweeping away cobwebs and gathering fallen plaster. Shadow followed at his heels, sniffing every doorway. The deeper Ethan went, the more the mansion seemed alive, each groan of wood and whisper of wind carrying secrets. When dusk fell, he lit a lantern and settled on an old couch in the library. The room smelled of aged paper and smoke. Shelves of books leaned tiredly, their spines faded to unreadable ghosts of words. Shadow, restless, began pacing before a cracked brick wall near the fireplace. Then came the sound, clink, a faint metallic ring buried behind the wall. The dog stiffened, growling low. Ethan froze. He tapped the bricks with the back of a screwdriver. Hollow. The sound came again, clearer this time, like something shifting behind stone. He crouched, pressing his palm against the cold surface. The wall seemed to breathe beneath his touch. A ripple of unease crawled down his spine. "Easy, boy," he whispered, but his own voice trembled. In the flickering lamplight, dust floated like ash. Shadow's gaze was fixed, ears pinned forward, tail rigid. Ethan stood slowly, staring at the wall that hid the sound. The lawyer's warning replayed in his mind. "Don't be curious." But as another faint metallic thud echoed from within the bricks, he realized it was already too late for that. The rain began at dawn, soft and unhurried, seeping through the cracked shutters of the Aldridge mansion. Ethan Cole had slept little. The strange metallic sound behind the library wall haunted him through the night, surfacing in his dreams like distant artillery fire. Shadow lay curled by the cold hearth, his chest rising slow and steady, ears flicking at every gust of wind. Ethan ran a calloused hand through his hair, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that he wasn't alone in this house. By mid-morning, he resumed his work, pushing his mop through the grand parlor, where portraits hung crooked and forgotten. One painting caught his eye, a family frozen in oil and dust. The man, Charles Aldridge, stood tall in a dark officer's uniform, a face chiseled with pride and weariness. His wife, Evelyn, was slender, pale, with kind eyes that seemed to follow the viewer across the room. Between them sat a child, Clara, perhaps 6 years old, clutching a small doll to her chest. The artist had captured them mid-laughter, but time had turned that joy into something ghostly. When Ethan shifted the frame, the wood paneling behind it creaked. A small gap revealed a hidden space between two boards. He pried it open carefully, the nails giving way with a groan, and pulled out a dusty leather-bound album. The cover was cracked, edges curled from years of neglect. Inside were sepia photographs, weddings, picnics, soldiers in uniform. And there, again, the Aldridge family. The photos told a silent story. Charles leaving for war, Evelyn alone on the porch, then a final page showing only the child Clara staring through a rain-streaked window. The last date written beneath it read 1947. Shadow's nails clicked on the wood floor as he wandered closer, nose twitching at the scent of mold and time. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's back. "Looks like they just vanished," he murmured. The air felt thicker somehow, as if the house itself was listening. He noticed faint pencil marks on the wall behind the picture, measurements, perhaps, or reminders. One word stood out, written faintly in cursive: safe. Driven by curiosity and an instinct honed in war zones, Ethan fetched his toolbox from the truck. He tapped along the wall, listening for the hollow sound he'd heard last night. Thud, thud, hollow. The echo stopped at a panel near the bookshelf. His pulse quickened. Sweat prickled the back of his neck as he pried the wood loose. A hidden compartment emerged, and inside, wrapped in canvas, was a small steel safe, no larger than a briefcase, its hinges rusted but intact. He carried it to the desk, wiped off the grime, and examined the lock. Old-fashioned, 4 digits, mechanical. Ethan was patient. Years of diffusing tension in combat zones had taught him the rhythm of pressure, sound, and silence. He listened, turned, listened again. On the third try, the safe clicked open. Inside lay a bundle of papers tied with ribbon, a thin diary bound in green leather, and a yellowed envelope. The writing on the envelope was delicate but firm. Do not trust Samuel Hargrove. Ethan's brow furrowed. The name tugged at something familiar. He opened the diary. The entries were written by Charles Aldridge himself, accounts of shipments, wartime contracts, and concerns about missing funds. Hargrove has changed, one entry read. His promises reek of ambition. Evelyn thinks I'm paranoid, but I fear he's building something behind my back. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills. Shadow barked once, sharp and warning. Ethan snapped the safe shut and turned toward the window, scanning the overgrown driveway. Nothing moved except rain. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the moment he'd opened that safe, something in the mansion had awakened with him. He sat down, the diary heavy in his hands. "Who are you, Charles?" he whispered. "And what did Hargrove do to you?" Shadow rested his chin on Ethan's boot, eyes steady, loyal. The fireless hearth cast their reflections in the cracked glass of the cabinet. Man and dog, framed by a house full of whispers. That night, as the storm deepened, Ethan placed the diary beside his lantern. The rain beat against the windows like the ticking of a clock counting backward through time. Somewhere deep inside the house, the same faint metallic sound echoed again, once, twice, like the heart of the past refusing to die. The next morning dawned gray, the rain finally giving way to a heavy silence that seemed to wrap around the hills like a shroud. Ethan Cole drove his battered truck into town, Shadow curled on the passenger seat, head resting on the open window frame. The dog's ears flicked at every passing sound, a car door slamming, a crow cawing, his instincts sharper than any human sense. Ethan felt the weight of the old diary and the letter in his jacket pocket. "Don't trust Samuel Hargrove." The words had burned into his mind all night, gnawing at the edge of reason. The Magnolia County Public Library stood at the corner of Main and 3rd, a 2-story red brick building that smelled faintly of paper and pine cleaner. Inside, the air was cool and dry, filled with the whisper of turning pages. Ethan's boots clicked against the polished floor as he approached the front desk, where a woman in her early 50s looked up from a stack of catalog cards. Her name tag read Grace Miller. Grace was tall and slender, with short silver hair that framed a face both kind and intelligent. Her eyes, clear hazel, slightly tired, carried the calm of someone who had seen too much and learned to keep secrets. Once she had been an investigative journalist for an Atlanta newspaper, digging into corruption cases until a car crash 5 years ago left her with a limp and the desire for quiet work. Yet her curiosity, like a blade dulled but not broken, still shone behind her gaze. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, voice low and composed. "I'm looking for information on someone named Samuel Hargrove," Ethan said, sliding the letter across the counter. Grace adjusted her reading glasses and read the name slowly. "Hargrove? That's a familiar one," she murmured. "They owned half this county once. Why do you ask?" Ethan hesitated. "Let's just say I found something in an old house that shouldn't have been forgotten." She led him to a side room lined with archives, old newspapers, company records, city directories. Dust motes drifted in the sunlight from a tall window. Grace moved with the precision of someone used to handling fragile truths. "The Hargrove and Aldridge Manufacturing Company," she said after a while, tapping an old ledger. "Founded 1939. Charles Aldridge and Samuel Hargrove were partners until 1947. That year, Aldridge died suddenly. Heart failure, they said. After that, the company belonged entirely to Hargrove." She paused, frowning. "But the timing, the stock transfer happened the same week as his death." Ethan leaned over the table, studying the yellowed pages. "You think it was murder?" Grace gave a soft, humorless laugh. "I think powerful men in Georgia didn't die by accident back then." Her voice had the edge of old experience. Someone who had once believed in justice, but learned how deep silence could go. She printed out a few newspaper clippings and handed them to him. "Keep these. But if you start digging into Hargrove, be careful. That family doesn't like its ghost disturbed." Outside, the clouds thickened again. Ethan thanked her and left with the folder under his arm. The moment he stepped into the damp air, Shadow growled softly. The dog's fur bristled, eyes fixed on a man standing across the street, a maintenance worker in a gray coat, his face hidden by a hood. He was watching them, motionless. When Ethan turned fully toward him, the man slipped into a narrow alley and vanished. Unease coiled in Ethan's gut as he drove back to the mansion. The rain started again, thin and cold. He parked near the old carriage house. Shadow jumped out, nose to the ground, tracing something. Behind the building, weeds grew thick against a concrete wall. The dog began to dig, his paws scattering wet soil. Beneath the vines, Ethan saw the faint outline of a sealed doorway, the cement rough and uneven, as if it had been closed in haste decades ago. He crouched, brushing off the dirt, the markings barely visible beneath moss. 1947. The same year Charles Aldridge died. Shadow whined softly, tail low. Ethan placed a hand on the cold surface. "Looks like you found another secret, boy," he whispered. Above them, lightning forked across the gray sky, throwing their shadows long against the ruined wall. Somewhere far off, church bells rang noon, their echo swallowed by the hills. The mansion, waiting beyond the trees, seemed to watch them return. Inside its hollow halls, dust stirred again, as if the house itself had heard their discovery and was whispering its approval. The wind carried a chill that morning as Ethan Cole stood before the concrete wall Shadow had uncovered. The faint year carved into the stone, 1947, glimmered under dew. He fetched his hammer and chisel from the truck, every instinct warning him this was more than just a sealed doorway. Shadow sat nearby, tail motionless, eyes fixed on the spot as if remembering an old scent buried deep in the rock. The rhythmic clang of metal against concrete echoed through the still air. After several hours, the final layer broke apart, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The first breath of air that rose from below was thick with mold and iron. Ethan turned on his flashlight, revealing a passage lined with stone walls slick with moisture. The steps creaked beneath his boots, and each exhale turned to mist. Shadow followed close, silent but alert. At the bottom lay a cavernous basement filled with wooden crates stacked haphazardly, some broken open, their contents long spoiled. Against the far wall stood an iron chest, its lid engraved with 2 letters, C.A. He crouched, brushing the rust away. "Charles Aldridge," he whispered. The lock gave with a heavy groan, revealing a pile of old documents, ledgers, and receipts, each brittle from time. Among them lay a black leather accounting book, its cover stiff but intact. Ethan opened it carefully. The entries were meticulous: dates, transfers, shipments, money drawn from wartime contracts and redirected through false accounts. Names appeared repeatedly, most marked out in faded ink, but one recurred in bold: Samuel Hargrove. The pages documented a massive embezzlement scheme, diverting government funds intended for veteran housing into private accounts. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Charles had uncovered this before his death. It was proof strong enough to destroy a dynasty. A sound broke the silence, soft gravel shifting outside the basement window. Ethan froze, closing the ledger. He killed the flashlight and waited. A faint beam of light swept across the wall, then vanished. Shadow's low growl rumbled in his chest. Someone was out there, watching. The beam returned, steadier this time, tracing the window frame. Ethan crept to the edge, glimpsing a figure in a dark raincoat by the trees, holding a flashlight that clicked off as quickly as it had appeared. Whoever it was moved with purpose, not curiosity. He stayed still until the footsteps faded, then climbed back upstairs, heart pounding. By dawn, exhaustion replaced fear. He set the documents on the kitchen table, their ink smelling faintly of old smoke, and poured himself black coffee from a dented thermos. When he opened the door to let Shadow out, something fluttered across the threshold, a folded envelope, damp from dew. The paper bore no return address, only his name typed in clean mechanical letters. Ethan Cole. Inside, a single note. You don't know what you're touching. Stop before it's too late. Ethan stared at the words, his jaw tightening. The typewriter font was precise, deliberate, and signed only with an initial, T. He folded it slowly, slid it into his jacket pocket, and looked out toward the misted fields. Looks like we're not the only ones digging, he muttered. Shadow trotted up beside him, tail flicking. The morning sun broke through thin clouds, casting a pale gold light over the cracked windows of the mansion. Behind those walls, truth waited like something alive, patient, buried, and unwilling to die quietly. The wind howled across the fields that night, carrying the scent of rain and something else. Fear, maybe, or inevitability. Ethan Cole stood by the cracked kitchen window of the Aldridge mansion, the warning letter still folded in his pocket. Outside, the trees bent in the wind like whispering figures. Shadow lay near the doorway, his ears twitching at every creak. The house, once merely silent, now felt alert, as though it had begun keeping its own vigil. By morning, the tension hadn't eased. Ethan drove back into town to meet Grace Miller. The librarian was waiting in her car, outside the diner on Main Street, her silver hair pulled back neatly, though her face looked pale under the weak daylight. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet urgency. "I did some digging," she said, sliding a manila folder across the seat. "Thomas Green, the lawyer who hired you? He's not just the executor of the Aldridge Trust. He's also the current legal advisor for Gordon Hargrove, Samuel's grandson. And Gordon, he's the CEO of Hargrove Holdings now." Ethan frowned, jaw tightening, as he flipped through the pages. Articles, company memos, photos of charity galas. Gordon Hargrove was a man in his 40s, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, with slicked-back blonde hair and a practiced politician's smile. A Harvard graduate decorated with awards for philanthropy. But every line in his face hinted at a man used to control, and never being told no. Grace leaned forward. "If he's involved, Ethan, this isn't about history anymore. It's about keeping something buried." That night, the threat became real. Ethan was sorting through the documents in the parlor when the front door burst open. Two men in black jackets rushed in, one tall and wiry, with a scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheek, the other thick-set with a shaved head. Their movements were fast, efficient. They weren't thieves. They were trained. Ethan reached for the crowbar he'd used earlier, but before he could react, the tall one swung a baton toward his ribs. The blow sent him sprawling across the floor. Shadow lunged instantly, a blur of black and white fury, his teeth sinking into the man's arm. The attacker howled, stumbling back as Shadow tore the fabric of his sleeve clean off. Ethan grabbed the second man's leg and pulled hard, knocking him into a table. Books scattered, glass shattered. The fight ended as quickly as it began. Both men fled through the broken door, the tall one clutching his bleeding arm. Shadow stood in the doorway, panting, growl deep in his throat. On the floor, amid the broken shards, Ethan found a torn patch of cloth embroidered in red thread. Hargrove Security. His heart sank. This wasn't random. It was a warning sent from the top. Later that night, as the storm rolled in, Grace called. Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to mask it. "Ethan, I found something else. There's one surviving heir of the Aldridge line, Margaret Lewis. She's a retired teacher in North Carolina, Clara Aldridge's granddaughter." Grace hesitated. She still has Evelyn's old letters. She says one of them mentions Charles's death wasn't natural. The next morning, Ethan and Shadow set out on the long drive through winding rural roads. Margaret lived in a small white farmhouse surrounded by willow trees. When she opened the door, Ethan saw a woman in her 70s, with kind blue eyes and a posture still straight despite age. Her hair was snow white, tied in a loose bun, and her voice carried the steady calm of someone who had seen sorrow yet refused to bow to it. "You look like him," she said softly. "Charles, the same eyes that don't give up." She led him into a cozy sitting room filled with books and old photographs. On the table lay a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she untied them. "These were my grandmother Evelyn's," she said. "She wrote that Charles never died from a heart attack. He was silenced because he discovered Samuel's theft during the war." Her eyes met Ethan's, fierce now. "And I think Gordon knows it." Outside, Shadow barked once at the empty road. A black SUV had stopped briefly at the end of the lane before driving away. The evening sun bled over the hills of Georgia, painting the Aldridge mansion in shades of crimson and gold. For the first time since Ethan Cole had arrived, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt ready. Grace Miller's old sedan crunched up the gravel driveway, carrying her and Margaret Lewis. Ethan opened the front doors, his worn flannel shirt dusted from a morning of repairs. Shadow padded beside him, tail flicking, watchful as always. Inside, the dining room table had been cleared of debris and turned into a war room. Stacks of folders, ledgers, and the black leather diary of Charles Aldridge lay neatly arranged, each page a piece of buried truth. Grace set down her bag and wiped her glasses. Her face, normally calm, was tense with purpose. "The county archivist confirmed the signatures," she said. "The ledgers match wartime records from the Treasury Department. Charles wasn't paranoid. He found proof of the embezzlement before he died." Margaret, sitting quietly across from her, clasped her hands around a teacup. Her knuckles were thin and veined, but her voice carried surprising strength. "He tried to expose them, didn't he?" Ethan nodded grimly, and Samuel made sure he couldn't. Margaret's eyes glistened, but she straightened her back, the steel of her lineage shining through. "Then it's time the truth spoke for itself." Grace smiled faintly. "It will. I installed a recording device earlier, just in case someone tries to stop us." Ethan raised an eyebrow, half amused. "You're full of surprises, Grace." She chuckled softly. "Years of journalism don't fade, even behind a library desk." As dusk deepened, thunderheads gathered on the horizon. The mansion's shadows grew long and restless. Ethan stepped onto the porch, the humid air thick with the smell of rain. A black SUV appeared at the bend of the drive, headlights cutting through the gloom. Shadow's ears pricked up. Ethan's gut tightened. "They're here," he murmured. The vehicle stopped abruptly. Gordon Hargrove emerged first, his tailored suit glistening under the drizzle, every motion sharp and deliberate. Behind him, two large men followed, his bodyguards, both dressed in black, with the disciplined stance of ex-military. Gordon's blond hair was slicked back, his smile cold as polished steel. "Mr. Cole," he said smoothly, stepping forward, "I believe you have something that belongs to my family." His tone carried the arrogance of a man who had never been told no. Ethan stood his ground. "Charles Aldridge's name is on every one of those documents. None of this belongs to you." Gordon's expression flickered, a flash of irritation breaking through his charm. "You're making a mistake. My grandfather did what was necessary for this town, for this country." His voice rose, anger cracking the calm veneer. "You think you can rewrite history because you found some old papers in a box?" The taller bodyguard moved toward the table. Shadow leapt before Ethan could speak, snarling, teeth bared. The man froze as the German shepherd's growl filled the room, low and thunderous. "Call off your dog," Gordon snapped. "Not a chance," Ethan replied, his voice steady as a loaded gun. The standoff broke when Gordon lunged toward the files. Ethan grabbed his arm, and the two men crashed into a chair, scattering documents. Lightning flashed through the windows. In the chaos, Grace slipped behind the counter, clutching her phone. She hit record on the hidden camera she'd placed earlier that afternoon. Gordon's voice filled the room again, louder, careless now. "My grandfather only did what he had to keep them quiet." He froze when he realized what he'd said aloud. Grace's calm voice cut through the storm. "Thank you, Mr. Hargrove. That will do." The police sirens arrived minutes later, red and blue lights painting the mansion walls. Gordon's bodyguards surrendered first. Gordon himself stood rigid, rain soaking his fine suit, fury and fear mixing on his face as officers led him away. Ethan exhaled slowly, Shadow pressed against his leg, still growling faintly. Grace met his eyes with a tired but satisfied smile. "Sometimes," she said, "justice doesn't come fast, but it comes." 3 months later, spring returned to Georgia with the scent of rain and magnolia blossoms. The Aldridge mansion no longer looked like a ghost of its former self. Fresh paint gleamed on its white columns, and the cracked windows had been replaced, though the old oak doors remained, their scars kept as memory. Ethan Cole stood on the porch steps, the same place he had once nearly bled defending the truth. Shadow lay beside him, his black and white fur catching the golden light. The dog was older now, slower in his gait, but his eyes still held that same sharp loyalty that had guided Ethan through every storm. The court's verdict had come like a sunrise after too long a night. The mansion and its surrounding acres were officially restored to the Aldridge family name. A foundation had been established, the Aldridge Memorial Foundation, to preserve both the property and the history of those who had fought for truth. Margaret Lewis, though frail, attended the ceremony in a pale lavender coat and wide-brimmed hat. She wept quietly when the plaque was unveiled, the engraved words catching the sunlight. "In honor of Charles and Evelyn Aldridge, who kept faith when the world forgot." Grace Miller arrived a week later, her hair cropped shorter, her limp more pronounced from the hectic months of press and legal hearings. Yet there was light in her eyes again, the unmistakable spark of a journalist who had reclaimed her purpose. She carried a bundle of freshly printed books under her arm. The cover read, "The House That Spoke the Truth." In bold serif letters, Ethan and Shadow faintly pictured in silhouette against the mansion. "It's not just your story," she told him, handing him a copy. "It's a reminder that courage doesn't die. It just waits for someone stubborn enough to dig it up." Inside the restored foyer, volunteers moved quietly about, hanging portraits and cleaning the last traces of dust. Among them was Luke Dawson, a young historian with sandy hair and round glasses, no more than 25. He had a gentle enthusiasm and a habit of speaking quickly when excited about old documents. "Mr. Cole," he said, smiling as he adjusted a frame. "It's strange. This house feels alive again, like it's breathing." Ethan nodded, a faint grin beneath the weathered lines of his face. "Maybe it's just remembering what honesty sounds like." Later that afternoon, when the work was done and the sun began to set, Ethan walked out onto the veranda. The magnolia trees swayed lightly in the warm breeze, their blossoms glowing white against the orange sky. Margaret stood by the parlor window, her thin hand pressed against the glass, tears reflecting in her eyes as she gazed at the restored portrait of her great-grandfather. Grace watched silently beside her, a small smile of peace softening her features. Ethan rested a hand on Shadow's head, the fur warm beneath his palm. "You see it too, don't you, boy?" he whispered. Sometimes God doesn't rush justice, but he never forgets. The dog's tail thumped once against the floorboards, and for a moment it seemed the whole house breathed with them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the Aldridge mansion glowed golden against the fading sky, no longer a monument to grief, but a testament to redemption reborn in the heart of Georgia. In every hidden place of this world, there are stories like the Aldridge mansion, of truth buried, faith tested, and light reborn. What happened here was not just justice restored, but a reminder that miracles often come quietly through those who refuse to give up. Maybe you too have your own walls, moments where life feels sealed by pain or silence. Don't lose faith. God's timing is never late, and His mercy never fades. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, let us hear your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and redemption. May God bless and protect you, and may every truth you uncover bring you closer to His light.